Hello, everyone. It is 3 p.m. Eastern, so we are going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Jessica Dean. I am the Director of Marketing with AIM Transportation Solutions. And just again, thank you guys for joining us today. So I'm going to go ahead and just give you a brief intro, and then I'm going to pass the mic over to Ron Bork. And Ron is our Vice President of Safety and Compliance, as well as Bob Thibodeau, who is our Director of Safety, and they're our hosts today. Just one note, we are recording this meeting tomorrow afternoon following the second session of this meeting. I will send out an email with a link to these recordings as well as a PDF version of the presentation. So this is something you can feel free to share with your drivers or anyone else in your organization who would find this information useful. It'll also contain Ron and Bob's contact information. So if either you or one of your drivers or anyone in your organization wants to reach out to them for further information, you can feel free to do so. We will also have a Q&A section at the end of this presentation, and you guys can ask your questions then. You'll stay muted for the majority of the meeting just to eliminate background noise, but then when we get to the Q&A portion, if you want to unmute yourself, you can. If you also want to ask questions in the chat function, you can feel free to do that, and I'll read them out to Ron and Bob so they can answer them at that time. So just quickly to give you a little bit of background information on AIM, a lot of you guys out there are already AIM customers. Some of you are pretty familiar with AIM and have been part of our webinar series in the past. Some of you might not know that much about us. So AIM Transportation Solutions is our parent company, and we have two major divisions. The first division is AIM Leasing Company, which is the largest privately held full-service leasing company in the country with nearly 50 service locations nationwide, and we are a member of the National Lease Affiliate Network with over 1,000 locations nationwide. We offer full-service leasing, commercial rentals, maintenance programs, professional shop management, and the sale of used equipment. And then we also have AIM Integrated Logistics, which is our second division, and this handles dedicated contract carriage and our brokerage division. AIM Integrated really partners with our customers and creates a seamlessness in their operations that they wouldn't otherwise have. We become an extension of your business with AIM Integrated, and we oversee all of your distribution. As such, we employ truck drivers across the country by the hundreds. Ron heads our safety department for this division. He and Bob are the absolute experts when it comes to all things driver safety. They oversee the safety division, which keeps us as a company, A, safe, and B, keeps us informed and operating within the regulations of the bodies that govern us as a transportation provider. So kind of what AIM likes to do is we definitely share resources between our divisions. So part of what this webinar is AIM Integrated Logistics Division sharing its safety resources with our leasing customers. Historically, we have went and held customer safety meetings on site with our customers. You may or may not have already been taken part in one of those. But with COVID and social distancing, that really isn't an option this year for someone from our safety department to come out and visit with you on site. So we're doing the best we can with this webinar here today. We also have a session tomorrow, which is going to be of a similar nature. And both of those recordings will be included in the email I send out to you tomorrow. So Ron, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jess. As you can see, we've got our presentation up, and I'll get through that here in just a moment. And, you know, we're going to start with an agenda. But before we get started, I want to say that this session is pretty driver focused. So the thought here is to give you some guidance on how to present a safety meeting if you're not actually a driver in the field. If you're a dispatcher or you own the company or whatever your role may be within the organization, this is pretty driver focused. So we are going to talk to you like you're the driver. So this is a good message to hand off to your drivers in lieu of an in-person safety meeting. And with that, we'll get started. Oh, and one other thing, there will be a Q&A session. We're going to be pretty general in nature so that we apply to most any operation out there, focused obviously on the upcoming winter months, and us in the north are closing in on some snow. We've seen a little bit already, so we'll get started. So our agenda, the first thing we're going to talk about is Operation Snowflake, which is AIM's program for managing winter readiness. Bob's going to talk about that. Then we'll be talking about preparedness on the driver and the truck level that I'll cover. The next section will be some key inspection points that are, most important. Vehicle inspections are always important to do a thorough job on, but we kind of group them together as some of the biggest, highest risk items if they were to be missed. And then we're going to cover defensive driving in the Smith system. Bob's our expert here. And then we're going to talk about some injury risks that are specific to the winter season. And then we're going to do a quick recap of the hours of service changes for those who may have missed our webinar a few months ago on the new hours of service rules. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bob for Operation Snowflake.
Great. Ron, thanks a lot. You want to go ahead to the next slide. Want to welcome all of the folks participating today. Glad to have you on board. Hope there'll be a few takeaways that are useful for your, as Ron said, for your drivers. So Operation Snowflake, we put this out every winter season, and it just highlights a few things that are important to keeping the vehicle up and running. As you know, in the winter, things move slower and brake easier. So we want to provide these tips for you. So the very first one, don't crank the engine for more than 15 seconds maximum at a given time. And obviously, you don't want to crank it more than 3 or 4 times for that 15-second period, because in real cold weather, the cold cranking amps are greatly impacted and the batteries wear down much quicker. So good tip to remember and pass it on to your drivers. Next is the engine heater, or sometimes referred to as the block heater. And it's real important to remember that these engine block heaters, they will not warm a cold engine. So you want to make sure the drivers plug these engines in upon their return from each trip, and make sure your outlet is powered beforehand, and that you have a good extension cord. You don't want to use one of those brown 18 gauge $1.59 extension cords from Walmart. Get an appropriate power cord and make sure it's functional. Next is the air tanks, and you want to make sure that those are drained after each trip. There's a wire cord attached to them. You want to make sure your drivers are pulling that cord and draining the water out of those tanks so they don't freeze up upon their return and the completion of their duty tour. That's very important to do as part of the post-trip inspection. Don't want to overlook that. Fuel, obviously a very important component to operating in the winter, and all AIM facilities have blended fuel. What that blended means is that there's anticoagulant components to it so that it flows smoothly in cold temperatures. If the fuel isn't blended, wax particles coagulate together, and soon the fuel filter is plugged up and the engine starts for fuel and can actually shut down. So you want to make sure that you're fueling at AIM locations or wherever you fuel, then make sure to know that the fuel is blended. Should also carry a bottle of fuel additive in case you have to purchase fuel that isn't blended, and you want to make sure that it's for ultra low sulfur diesel fuel only, and that can also act to keep the fuel from gelling. That's that coming together of those wax particles. And then lastly, warning lights. We can't ignore them. So if your drivers have a warning light that comes on, please call road rescue. That number should be easily available. It's 800-321-9038. And that number is answered 24/7. We have a road rescue department that is second to none and will certainly be available to you to help your drivers identify what the dash light is concerning and diagnose it and make appropriate adjustments in terms of service. So don't ignore those warning lights. That's it for Operation Snowflake. I'm going to turn it back over to Ron for winter preparedness.
Thank you, Bob. One quick comment about the warning lights. If you've got a full service lease truck with us and you haven't already gotten your telematics device registered with us, we will monitor your vehicle warnings that are issued through your telematics system. And then we would actually contact a driver in the event that there was a serious issue identified by your truck's diagnostic system. So just a quick tip, speak with your salesperson about that if you're not already signed up, or if you're not sure if you're signed up. Under winter preparedness, we talk about two different segments of winter preparedness, driver safety preparation and then vehicle readiness. So under driver safety preparation, these are kind of the things that your driver should make sure that that he or she has got with them during the winter months, especially during the winter months. Some of these are you'd want to have all the time, but the first one on the list we've got is a snow brush or a scraper and a scraper. Obviously, it's got to be long enough to be able to reach the surfaces of the truck for the different types of vehicles that you may be operating, whether you've got a straight truck or a tractor trailer. You may need a different type of setup to remove snow and ice from the glass. Also, the driver wouldn't want to forget to remove snow and ice from any lights as well. Window cleaner and paper towels. When we're running our defrosters, sometimes we're going to notice that our glass isn't as clear as it should be, and that glass should be cleaned, and having the appropriate supplies to do that is imperative, especially in the winter. Extra windshield wipers. Sometimes our blades are going to freeze to our windshield. We're going to knock them loose and they're going to tear, and having extra wipers with us on hand can keep us ready for that and keep us moving when we might otherwise be waiting for road service. Ice melt, sand, and a shovel. Obviously, in case we get stuck, these are the tools that we would need to help us get out from that situation. Warm clothing and extra bedding. We mentioned gloves, hat, jacket, but really when we think about warm clothing, we want to dress in layers. It's something that we would think about if we're going out skiing, but not maybe something we think about if we're planning to drive a truck. So that's one thing we need to be sure of, that we're dressed appropriately, and the key in the winter months is layering. And extra food and water. And sometimes when we have a breakdown and we're on the side of the road, things happen things take longer to happen in the winter months. As Bob mentioned, everything moves slower. So that means not only your vehicle, but a service vehicle that might be coming to help you, or if you get stuck, a tow truck, a driver could be on the side of the road for a number of hours waiting for help before they're rescued. So they want to have enough food and water to sustain that. And in the worst storms, it could be days. So they want to be sure to be prepared for that. Always want to have cell phone charging equipment, especially in the winter when they don't know what's going to happen if they need to call for help. A flashlight is something that is always needed for a driver to do their inspections, but especially in the winter months when they could be on the side of the road for longer than expected or at unexpected times. And the same follows with the reflective safety vest. It's an AIM rule that any vehicle operator should be wearing a reflective safety vest when outside of their truck, but it's also a good thing to have in a winter months when they could be on the side of the road unexpectedly. In vehicle readiness, truck preparation is the key to success. Bob talked about blended fuel. In addition to that, I want to highlight that drivers should always make sure that they keep their fuel tanks at least half full to minimize condensation inside the tanks, and in the event that they could be stuck on the side of the road for longer than normally expected. They want to make sure the tires are good. AIM's standard is higher than the DOT standard for tread depth. So if there's any question about the quality of their tires, or make sure that they're sufficient and legal, just run it through an AIM shop and we'll be more than happy to take a look. Obviously, Bob also talked about plugging in the truck whenever possible, and that the block heater is meant to keep an engine warm, not to get it warm. And again, never ignore that engine light that might be on in the winter months. That can be imperative to staying safe on the road. A few other things regarding readiness, additive, which we've already discussed, extra coolant. It's important that water is never added to the reservoir and that only coolant is added to keep it from freezing and causing damage to the engine, and also keeping the driver stuck on the side of the road. Washer fluid is important in the winter. We all, as we drive, we know that the spray on the road is in the low level of the sun can be blinding, a blinding combination. We want to make sure that we don't run out of washer fluid. We're going to use more in the winter. And then the red reflective triangles. So you want to make sure that those are also in the truck. It's a violation to not have them all the time, but make sure they're there. You never know when you're going to be stuck, where you're going to be stuck, how long you're going to be there. And visibility in the winter is lower than it is during the summer months. In the vehicle inspection category, what are the most basic ideas about vehicle inspections? What are the real basics? And it's the acronym BLT. It's not our lunch. It's our brakes, our lights, and our tires. Those are the real most basic components of an inspection. So under the BLT category, we want to make sure that our brake pads, linings, our brake shoes are not, not contaminated with oil. They're not cracked, and that they're sufficiently thick, not dangerously thin. And we want to make sure that our driver knows how to do the in-cab brake test, which we're going to show you what that looks like a little later. And again, Jessica's going to send this presentation out, so you'll be able to distribute that to your drivers to make sure that they are still well-versed on performing the brake test, which they should have known when they completed driving school, but sad to say, many drivers have forgotten how to perform the in-cab brake test. As far as lights go, we want to make sure that they're working, they're clean, the lenses are clean, they're the appropriate color, not broken, they're not missing. And we also don't want to forget that reflective tape on our equipment. Tires, we've got some tread depths here, and again, AIM standards are better than the DOT standards. So make sure that you have sufficient tread depth, that your pressure is good, your sidewalls aren't damaged, no nails, obvious defects. You're also looking for flat spots, uneven tread wear. Make sure your tires are in good shape. These components comprise a very high percentage of your inspection defects that are noted by DOT. So, but the point here is these are real major safety components to the truck. So making sure that these work properly is very important to keeping your driver and other motorists safe on the road. The next category is about those other motorists and keeping the other people safe on the road. We're looking here at the fifth wheel, your airlines, and your fluids. So we want to make sure that our fifth wheel is locked. The only way to really ensure that your fifth wheel is locked properly is to get a visual on the jaws and the pins. And once you have a visual that your fifth wheel is properly locked, the driver should perform a tug test just to make sure that you've coupled properly if you're operating a tractor trailer combination. Airlines, we want no chafing, rubbing, bulges, kinks, no defects in the air system whatsoever, and definitely if there are leaks that are revealed during the brake test or are audible during the inspection outside the truck, those are things that need to be resolved to keep the systems functioning properly. And then fluids, we want to make sure we're in the correct operating range for our engine oil and our hydraulic fluids. And we're going to look for leaks and or pooling of fluid. And the last group of do not miss inspection points are some of the things for personal safety of the operator. So we want to make sure that the steps, handholds, catwalks, ladders, that they're all securely mounted, and so that as the driver's entering and exiting, using 3 points of contact always, that those handholds that he's relying on are solidly mounted, that we don't have load issues, that securement devices aren't failing, or that they're properly installed, that the doors operate properly, and any material handling equipment that's in the truck is functioning properly as well. And then you want to make sure that the general condition of the vehicle is good, that you don't have any cracked glass, that your mirrors aren't cracked or broken or insecurely mounted. And this next slide is our brake test. I'm not going to go through the details of the brake test, but this is the brake test. Every CDL driver should be familiar with this brake test. And it's a step-by-step process for them to test right from the cab of their truck whether or not their brake system's functioning properly. They should do it at every pre and post trip, as well as every time they drop and hook a trailer. Once they drop and hook a trailer, they've also drop and hooked and replaced a portion of their braking system. So they have possible new defects in that trailer that could cause a loss of air pressure and cause their braking system to fail. So they want to, every time they do a drop and hook, they should do a new brake test. It just takes a couple of minutes, and it's the best insurance to make sure that those brakes function properly. And our next section is going to be on defensive driving strategies specific to the winter months. And we're going to turn it back over to Bob.
Okay, thanks, Ron. So the next slide gives you the overview of the Smith system. Now, there's a number of different defensive driving systems on the market today. National Safety Council puts one out. It's in 8 sections, takes about 8 hours. This one is very easy to remember. It was composed by a truck driver roughly in 1952. And they call them keys, the 5 keys of the Smith system. And they're listed here for you. Aim high in steering. That doesn't mean look up. It means look far down the road. You want to look into the future anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds ahead. In other words, where your truck's going to be in 15 to 30 seconds. And on surface streets, you know, the speed limit's 30, 35 mile an hour. That's about a block and a half to actually 3 city blocks at 30 seconds. Road speeds, 50, 55 mile an hour. We're talking now quarter mile to up to half a mile at 30 seconds. Another way to think about it is to look as far down the road as you possibly can and identify potential hazards. Of the 5 keys, aim high in steering is probably the most important key to remember and to use. And it's critical to identifying hazards and being able to, for example, most states have a state law that when there's an emergency vehicle on the shoulder or a state police officer having somebody pulled over on the shoulder, other motorists are supposed to make a lane change and move left. If you can't, then you need to slow down considerably. But we've all seen drivers get trapped and not be able to move left because they didn't identify that hazard in plenty of time. If they do, if they aim high in steering, they're going to see that and may able to move left and find a place in that passing lane to position themselves and avoid that close call with that emergency vehicle. So aim high in steering is extremely important, and you want to make those adjustments, whether they be lane adjustments or speed adjustments. This will help you do that. One of the things that you can do is read every sign, whether it's a pavement marking, whether it's a speed limit sign, whether it's a lane directive sign, or if it's an advertising sign. If you get into the habit of identifying signs, it's going to force your eyes to move and look further ahead. Along with this key, you watch for signs of ice in the winter, black ice in particular. I'm sure you've all heard about black ice. It looks like the roadway is wet, but it's actually coated with a thin layer of ice. And it becomes evident whenever you're following other vehicles or your own vehicle, particularly trucks, tractor, trailer, straight trucks, and you look for road spray. And all of a sudden, you notice an absence of road spray. Can roll your window down, feel the back of your mirror, your outside mirror. If it's ice covered and you don't see road spray, but the roadway still looks wet, then you're on black ice. So you want to slow down and adjust your speed accordingly. The second key is get the big picture. And this simply means making your eyes fully aware of what's ahead of you and avoiding vision barriers. That's an example of following a tractor trailer too close. You can't see what's up ahead of you or around you. So it's important to maintain a safe following distance. So after aim high and steering, getting the big picture is the second most important key. And the main component here is a safe following distance. And there's a formula for that, and it's listed right on this slide. 1 second for every 10 foot of vehicle length. For example, we'll take a tractor trailer roughly 70 feet in length. Well, 1 second for every 10 foot of vehicle length would be 7 seconds. And that would be for speeds under 40 mile an hour under good conditions. If you're traveling over 40 mile an hour, you want to add 1 second. And if there's any adverse conditions such as nighttime or rain, snow, sleet, you want to add seconds. This is an extremely important component to establishing how to establish proper following distance. You have the most control over the space in front of you, and this is critical to avoiding rear-end collisions. After a head-on collision, rear-end collisions are the most costly in terms of personal injury as well as property damage. Okay, let's move to the third key, and that would be keep your eyes moving. And you have two types of vision. One is your central vision, which allows you to focus on something that you've identified through the use of your second vision type, which is your peripheral vision. Every DOT exam given to a driver, which is required, the examiner checks the peripheral vision, and on average, each person should have about 180 degrees of peripheral vision, 90 degrees in each eye. The minimum acceptable by DOT standards is 70 degrees in each eye or 140. If it falls below that, then the driver would not be able to pass the vision test for DOT. So you investigate with your central vision. Your peripheral vision allows you to identify potential hazards that you want to investigate with your central vision. Part of your use of the central vision is to scan your mirrors every 5 to 8 seconds. Your mirrors help you stay up and alert as to what is around your vehicle. And at the bottom here, it says, try reading this line of text while only looking at the word in red without moving your eyes. When you do that, the whole sentence pretty much becomes out of focus. So it's important to keep your eyes moving and identify hazards. Okay, next key. Key 4 is leave yourself a nap. This is often referred to as space cushion driving. Again, you have typically 4 sides of your vehicle that you need to be aware of, but there's also the very top of the vehicle as well as the bottom of the vehicle. But when you leave yourself an out, as I mentioned earlier, you have the most control over the space in front of you. And by establishing a safe following distance of 6 or 7 seconds, then that should help you with your other 3 sides to each side and to the rear of your vehicle. Don't worry too much about the rear. It's the front that you'd want to be most concerned with. Okay, the next key is make sure they see you. Ron talked about keeping the lights clean and working. That's extremely important, as well as the what they call the DOT tape or the conspicuity tape. Needs to be wiped off. The LEDs don't generate any heat, so we need to keep our lenses clean, and that'll help you be seen while you're driving. Other things that you can do to draw attention to yourself, particularly in city situations or towns, is at intersections, light tap of the horn to establish eye contact. You have a number of devices available to you on the truck that will help you be seen by others. You have the 2 horns, your city horn and the air horn. Obviously, when using the air horn, you want to be selective about when you use that, so it's not to scare anybody or use it in an aggressive manner. Tapping the brake lights early sends a message or a signal to those behind you that can't see around you that you will be stopping shortly, or there's a hazard up ahead that you're adjusting to. You have your turn signals left and right. You also have your 4-way flashers that you can activate as well. And then the headlights. A part of seeing and being seen is running with your headlights as a best practice anytime you're driving. Keep the headlights on. And then you also have the ability to flash high beams back to low beams to gather attention to your location. And there's a summary on the 5 keys, I think, which is next. Aim high in steering, get the big picture, keep your eyes moving, leave yourself an out, and make sure they see you. Extremely important, but it's easy to for your drivers to learn and to practice. Okay, injury risks. In the winter, these go up, and as you can see, winter is slip and fall season. Obviously, slips occur when there's too little traction between your foot and shoe and the walking surface that you're on. A trip occurs when you contact an object that's in the way and you drop to a lower level unexpectedly. And then a fall is when you lose your balance. So I was a little surprised to learn this statistic, but Slips, trips, and falls is the second leading cause of accidental death. So it's real important that we take extra precautions in this season to prevent that from occurring. One of the first things that you want to do is make sure you have proper footwear. Neoprene, composite soles, much better than leather, and low heels, or even actually flat sole shoes work best. And use the penguin walk as you shuffle. Try to avoid picking your feet up too far, and it'll help you maintain balance. With regard to that, don't leave your hands in your pockets. You want your hands free. Should you have a slip and fall, you want to be able to roll and take the impact with your thigh, your hips, rather than extending your arms. You can use those to help brace after impact. But if you have them extended, there's a higher risk of breaking or fracturing bones in your arms and hands. The impact force of a driver exiting the cab, we want to use the 3 points of contact, and that's simply 2 hands and a foot, or 2 feet and a hand as you exit. You come out of the truck with facing into the truck, and you want to watch where you're stepping. A lot of drivers come out face first, and like going down a flight of steps at the house. You don't want to do that. Some drivers actually jump out of their truck facing forward and take a awful impact on their body and legs. For example, a 250-pound person, if they jump out of their truck, say from the lower step, 16 inches, that exerts a pressure of 395 pounds on their body. You raise that to, say, the second step, and we're looking at 33 inches, then that weight jumps to 1,170 pounds. That's a lot of impact for the skeletal frame to withstand. As you're walking, as I mentioned, cell phones, you want to leave those in your pocket. Don't be texting and reading. That'll distract you from what's in front of you. I like to say, don't put your feet where your eyes haven't been. That simply means watch where you're going and be aware of your surroundings. And if you see, don't take shortcuts over snow piles or ice. You want to stay on pavement, and whenever you can. So it's important to remember the 3 points of contact: entering, and more importantly, exiting the vehicle, watching the area that you're stepping onto, and be aware of your surroundings as you're walking on these uneven surfaces and surfaces that are snow covered, maybe haven't been shoveled or plowed, and even have ice on them. And they may look wet, and maybe you're walking around a building in sunshine, you round the corner, it's a shaded area, and now you're on black ice. So again, don't put your feet where your eyes haven't been. Simply means look and be aware of your surroundings. The other items that we want to be aware of, and Ron mentioned this earlier with regard to proper wear of coats, hats, and gloves, is frostbite and hypothermia. That's why when you leave out, you want to have the proper clothing to withstand this type of, sometimes the weather gets to below zero. And if you have a breakdown, this could certainly come into play. Also, in the cold, muscles tighten up. and can sprain and strain more easily. So if you've been sitting for a while, you want to stretch your legs and arms and waist. Some drivers get in and out of their vehicle anywhere from 5 times a day to as much as 50 or more times per shift. So it's important that you're aware of stretching and limbering up. Doesn't take but less than a minute to do these stretches.
The last section that we've got for today is just a brief recap of the recent hours of service update. There were four changes that we're going to go over, and we're going to go over those very briefly. We want to be respectful of your time and also leave some time for questions. But the stated purpose of the changes was to provide flexibility for the drivers. The FMCSA didn't rush into the changes. We say it's been a long time coming, but ever since the implementation of the ELD mandate with the AOBRD phase for the majority of carriers, drivers have been telling us that these systems make me drive when I'm tired. They make me, I don't have any flexibility. As soon as I start my clock, there's nothing can be done to stop that 14-hour clock from ticking away. If I'm too tired to drive, it forces me into a position where I can't stop to rest, that I have to keep going. So they've fixed that, and they've provided that flexibility. FMCSA doesn't see this as having any negative safety outcomes. They don't expect that this is going to create more fatigue in the driving force in America. They expect this to have, if any outcome, a positive one. And they were very calculated in the approach. We'll see they were very specific in the changes that they made that provided flexibility. And the numbers that are in this presentation, they're going to apply to property carrying operations, but there are changes that are essentially equivalent to passenger carrying operations, but we'll be focused today on property carrying. So the 4 areas of change were the short haul exception, adverse driving conditions, the 30-minute break, and the sleeper berth provision, also known as split sleeper. Something not to be afraid of. It's probably the biggest tool in our drivers' arsenals, being able to adjust when they work and when they break. So the short haul exception, the slides are all going to look essentially like this one. The green box in the upper right is the new rule. The gray box in the upper left is the old rule. And then we've got some comments down below. So for the short haul exception, the non-CDL drivers always had a 150 air mile radius and a 12-hour limit, while the CDL drivers had to be within a 100 air mile radius, which is about 115 miles on the road. They've changed that, and now the CDL and the non-CDL drivers are on the same standard of 150 air mile radius, and they both can work up to a 14-hour day and still remain on that short haul exception. It's important to note that this exception is what makes a driver exempt from having an ELD. So it's important because of the 8-day paper log limitation per 30-day period. What that meant before is if a driver was going to work more than 12 hours per day, 8 times in a month, roughly, that he would be required to be on an ELD just for those exception days. So this really limits the number of drivers that need to be on an ELD, and it limits the drivers that will need to take a 30-minute break. So we've got some comments down below, but what's unchanged are the start and end of the day. They have to be the same location. We still need to have our 10-hour breaks. It's just the 100 to 150 change, and the 12 to 14-hour limit was changed. The next change was the adverse driving conditions exception. So in the past, this exception was essentially unusable. When a driver ran into a delay, they were only allowed 2 additional drive hours from 11 to 13 hours per day, but they got no extension of their 14-hour clock. With the new change, they have added or allowed drivers to take up to a 16-hour day on their 14-hour clock, up to 16, with the 2 additional drive hours to make up for the lost time of the adverse condition. It's important to note that they also removed driver responsibility from that decision in the definition of the rule. So it's really a dispatcher decision, and at AIM, our standard is we're asking our drivers to contact their dispatchers for permission to use this exception and not allowing them to use it without dispatcher approval. And we're recording that information in our logs just as a best practice. It's not required by the exception. It does allow some flexibility if a driver hits a snowstorm, but again, it's got to be an exception that's unexpected. That's one of the keys in the rule. So if the dispatcher could have reasonably known about it in advance of the driver running into the adverse condition, then the rule wouldn't apply. So we want to be really careful. I saw a very brief YouTube video on this topic, and they described this particular exception as the 4th string quarterback. You want to use this condition as little as possible. If you run into adverse conditions that make you extend your day every day, it'll be frowned upon by FMCSA or an inspector during an inspection, and you're probably going to have some explaining to do. But you want to use it as often as a football team wants to use their 4th string quarterback, which is never. They don't want to be put in that position. So use it sparingly, but it is there to bail out your driver. Now, we do think that there are other exceptions that are, better options, and we'll get to those in a minute. The 30-minute break has also been adjusted. So the old rule, the 30-minute break was required within 8 hours of coming on duty. And again, the operator couldn't stop that 14-hour clock from ticking. He couldn't stop the 8-hour clock from ticking. If he started at midnight, by 8 a.m., he needed to take a 30-minute break, and that break needed to be in an off-duty status, either line 1 or line 2 on their log. Under the new rule, the 8 hours only elapses if it's 8 hours of driving. And then the 30-minute break, they've added the ability to take on line 4 while they're on duty. So a delivery would count, or a period of loading the truck would count. And again, only drivers that actually drive for 8 hours would need to take that break. So again, we've made another rule change to minimize the number of drivers that need to take the 30-minute break. So there are a great number of drivers that will never need to take a 30-minute break in the sense that they'll have to actually stop working. Of course, they're always protected from driving while fatigued by the law, and we encourage our drivers to stop and do a cat nap if that's what they need, or a power nap, to make sure that they're safe on the road. And we never want to push our drivers to work when they're fatigued. But by law, they're not required, if they don't want to, stop and actually do an off-duty break. And the sleeper berth provision, it's probably the most confusing thing that our drivers need to know in terms of operating their ELD or recording their record of duty status. The old rule, it sounds like a minor change, but the old rule was an 8 and 2 split. So they had to do a minimum of an 8-hour period in the sleeper and a minimum of a 2-hour period off duty or in the sleeper. They now are allowed a 7-hour minimum, and that would be paired with a 3-hour minimum break. So an 8-2 or a 7-3 or any combination in that range is going to be permitted. The big rule is that the 2-hour rest break is no longer included in the 14-hour drive window. Sounds like a minor issue, but what that does is if the driver takes a 2-hour rest break of off duty or in the sleeper berth, say during an unloading event where he's not required to work, and he's not required to log that as on duty, that will actually extend his 14-hour clock to the 16-hour limit. This is something if you want to use We can get you a link to our previous webinar on the topic, or we can get you some more information if you have questions. This isn't enough information that we're presenting today to be able to do the calculations necessary, just a recap of the events, or of the changes rather. So please reach out if you have questions about it, but this provides the maximum flexibility for your driver. They're never going to, well, I don't want to say never, but they're rarely going to be in a position where they can't work the hours that they feel that their body's telling them they need to work. So they'll be able to have their deliveries at the times that they'll need them. And this is the maximum flexibility that the law allows. Quick recap, we covered Operation Snowflake. Some of the keys that AIM thinks are vital to success in the wintertime. We talked about cold weather preparation for our vehicles and our drivers, what they need to have with them in the truck. We talked about the keys for inspections. We also covered the Smith system and the defensive driving system. A quick recap of those keys are aim high in steering, get the big picture, keep your eyes moving, leave yourself an out, and make sure they see you. This is the way that people drive. These are the ways, whether they are able to alliterate it in words or not, this is what they're taught way back when they were 16 years old to, look as far down the road as they can and get the big picture and keep your eyes moving. Those are the ways that people drive, whether they realize it or not. So it makes a lot of sense to drivers when you start to talk about it. Winter injury risks, we covered some of the risks that our drivers face. And then the last topic was the hours of service changes that were imposed in September of this year for the 4 categories. With that, that's going to conclude our presentation, and we're going to open it up for questions.
Everyone's muted, so if you want to verbally ask a question, just hit unmute, and then you can go ahead and ask it that way. And you can also type the question in the chat function. I can read it to Ron and Bob that way if you have any. Okay, I had one come across, and that is, where can I access this information to share it with my driver? Tomorrow afternoon, following our second session, which we're having tomorrow morning, I'm going to send out an email to everyone who is registered, which would include everyone on this call. It'll have links to both the video from today and the video from tomorrow. And I will include that hours of service change video. And that was from a webinar that Ron hosted for us in September. And that has some more detailed information on it, on the hours of service, the changes to the regulations on that. So that'll be coming out. Oops,
one note on that other presentation, I think that hours of service, if you want to get your drivers to look at that one, was it just only maybe 25 minutes? Probably. It was fairly brief.
It was brief, Ron. So, and yeah, that was a good one. We got some feedback from several customers who had shown that to their drivers and found it to be a useful resource for that. So,
right.
I'll definitely include that, as well as a PDF version of Ron and Bob's presentation from today.
The other thing is they can encourage their drivers to log in tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
Absolutely. Any other questions? I have one. Do most filling stations have the blended fuel?
Bob, you want to handle this one?
Yeah, sure. Up in the north where we're at, I would say most do for fueling of trucks, but you could always ask, doesn't hurt, and carry an extra bottle of additive with you.
Right. If you're in Florida and you're running from Detroit to Tampa and you buy fuel in Tampa, you're probably going to get untreated fuel. Is that fair, Bob?
That's exactly. Yes. It's regional throughout the country. South of I-10, it's probably not blended.
Right. And also the other best practice is to buy your fuel from a truck stop rather than, your local, filling station. Fair?
Yep.
All right. Any other questions? Very good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for everyone's time today. And thank you to Ron and Bob. That was really informative and a very well done presentation. So thank you very much for your time today. And thank you for sharing the resources of AIM integrated logistics with some of our leasing customers and some other people out there who have a vested interest in keeping their drivers safe. We'll make sure that this information is available to you tomorrow afternoon. One more question, I'm sorry. Do you recommend any particular module from the Smith system?
They have, yes, I do. There's a module that covers all 5 of the keys. That would be probably the best one of the group to focus on. They also have modules that focus on, for example, intersections, backing, lane changing, that type of thing. But primarily to introduce to your drivers the defensive driving, it would be the one that covers all 5 in one session.
We'll get to Jess the PDF of that document. I think is it a 12-page pamphlet that we've got, Bob?
Yes.
We'll get that out with the rest of the materials that come from this meeting.
Perfect. All right, anything else? All right, well, thank you everyone for your time. Ron, Bob, thank you everyone. Have a great afternoon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Jess.
Bye-bye, guys.